But the core idea that we're seeing is that we're advising organizations, IT organizations, that they need to move at 2 speeds today. They've done a lot of work on core and traditional processes and hardening processes and creating great infrastructures. And we're not saying the work is done there, but we're saying it's largely a renovation and improvement area. It's not start from scratch. But there's another area of business which really is about exploiting these new technologies, exploiting mobile, exploiting social, looking at new ways to leverage information. And for that, they have to move fast. This is all about leveraging both together, but buyers are still working on how to do that. We're actually advising them in our sourcing practice on they need to change their sourcing and procurement processes to take account these ideas of bimodal IT. We're telling them they can't buy solutions where they're looking to innovate and move fast with the same processes and steps that they've used for their traditional systems of record and core infrastructure decisions. Buying organizations are seeing that, but they're still adapting. There really isn't a standard buying approach. When we asked across a number of different technology categories, consistently, there was no consistency as to who owned the process. As the process moved, it flows between IT and the CIO group, or the CXO group, or the lines of business. And across organizations in the same sector, it could also be different. So there isn't a pattern, it's still changing. We're going to have to deal with that. Second thing about it, though, is that really we're seeing the whole buying process change. And this picture takes a little bit of time to interpret, but let me try and explain it to you. We used to think of the buying process and also our selling process as being very structured. We build awareness, create interest, drive demand, and that spurs people to action. And they move through this process. When we look at what happens in buying today, we don't see any of that structure anymore. It's much more fluid. We actually think they perform 4 different types of activities in their buying process. In some cases, it may move very much in this structure. That's sort of the ideal world for them and the ideal world for you. They start by exploring. They hear from friends or they see something online about a new solution area that could help their business. And they start researching it, and they decide, is this something worth us investigating? Then they evaluate, looking for alternatives. How can we solve this problem? What are the choices? Who are the providers? As they narrow that list, they look to engage with specific providers to try and understand the approach they take and can it really work for their business. And throughout all of this, there's an underlying tone of experience where they're evaluating what's it like to work with this provider, what's it like to use their technology. At various stages, one of these is going to be top of mind, and it can flow back and forth. Have any of you been involved with a client where you engaged with them and they were getting ready to make a decision? You introduced some new capabilities, maybe AT&T introduced some new stuff that you shared with them, and all of a sudden they sort of stopped their process and went back and started looking at things over again. Or has that been done to you? Those are some of the things that we see happening. Throughout all, when those big changes happen, we call those moments of truth. And the most common moments of truth to think about are when a buyer says, okay, I have enough information to continue to move this forward. Or they get some input or stimulus and they decide that they're going to add a provider to the list, or they're going to remove that. And when we did our research, one of the things people told us is that the quality of some information, in particular customer case studies, references, interactions with the sales organization and sales presentations, could often be make or break moments. And by that, they would say that if the quality was poor, it might cause them to immediately disqualify the vendor. So what's going on here is we're now seeing a world where buying is customer-driven. We don't have some control over it. It's continuous. It's not these sequential steps. Everything flows together, and it's dynamic. It's not predictable. The length of this process could be very long or it could be very short, but they're always performing these sets of activities. Now, the other interesting thing about this is that when we ask buyers, where do they go looking for information as they explore, as they evaluate, as they engage? What's their prominent sources? The top ones is self-driven information search through trusted websites. So So they actually go looking at sites of people that they trust, organizations that they trust for the information. The second is recommendations from influencers. That could be analysts, that could be experts, that could be you guys, if they view you as an influencer, an expert in their industry. Third is recommendations from peers. And then fourth is actually sales interactions with providers or provider partners. And you can see that providers, your influence of the sales interaction grows as they get deeper into the process. The interesting thing is the specific marketing activities that we do. Information search on the provider website, and frankly, information search just on Google, people are relying on less and less. But the key thing that this tells me is that we have a trust issue that we need to be dealing with. And that buyers typically are saying, we don't trust providers as much as we trust peers and independent influencers. And it has a big impact on the way they buy. We also went a little bit deeper, and we asked them, how do you spend your time? If you look at the totality of your buying process, where do you spend your time? And what we discovered is only 32% of the time has them focused specifically on you. Either reading material that you or AT&T produces, the provider, and this isn't specific to AT&T, this is for the industry, so you are the provider, or interacting with you. The other parts of the time is they're talking internally. They're reaching out to third-party influencers. They're reading information from third-party influencers. They're working on social networks, trying to get advice. So as you think about that, as you think about buying and working with your buyers, recognize that you are not the focus of their world. You're spending a lot of time doing other things. Now there's an interesting thing that we found that was a little bit different in this survey. I'm sure many of you have heard the stats, they're all over, about the buying process is anywhere from 57 to 75% complete before a buyer contacts the providers or the vendors. According to what we're hearing from the technology buyers specifically, that's not true. I will say they're educated, but what they tell us is that they will reach out to you much earlier in their buying process. And that's because of this confusion, this quest for information. You're going to see later some information when they tell us specifically what they're looking for. But if you provide quality information, you can engage early. If you help their buying process, you can move it along, and they will contact you early. But at the same time, even as they're working with you, they're still going to look to others to understand differentiation. When they ask what sets people apart, they go to their peers. I imagine some of the networking you guys were doing during the break, during this event, you've probably been talking to each other. Hey, what do you think of that new technology? You guys have success selling it? Is it working great for customers? Buyers are doing it. They're leveraging social networks to do it easier than they ever could before. They come to firms like us. They go to their professional communities. Further down, they look to solution providers and partners for help in this. But you're not at the top of the list. So part of your efforts is actually to get those influencers and others and get your customers to share their stories with each other. And ultimately what this actually says is that really the old days are over. And I don't know if any of you remember this ad. This was a famous ad that McGraw-Hill put together years ago. Looking at it in hindsight, I have a feeling I bought my new glasses because I like the way the guy looked in the picture. But basically it's a guy who's sitting there saying, I don't know you, I don't know anything about you, I don't know what you care about, I don't know what you can do for me, what do you want to sell me? And it was McGraw-Hill trying to convince people to advertise. But really in today's world, what we have is a buyer who does their own research. They're very much business driven and focused on the business value of technology. And they reach out to their trusted network. And that network is growing and growing and being easier and easier for them to connect with because of social networking. But at the same time, while they have access to all this information, they're confused because they're overwhelmed with information and they're plagued by complexity of trying to understand the differences between things and all the options. And often that leaves them uncertain and delays buying. And all this is happening even as they try to move faster in the face of increased competition, the pressures of two-speed IP and others. So let's take a deeper look at why buyers are telling us they're frustrated. So one of the things we started with is we actually did a survey on this, and we asked buyers, did they understand, did they feel that providers did a good job of differentiating themselves? Only 24% thought they were doing a pretty good job. Gave it a 5 or a 5 to a 7. 52% thought it was hard to understand what set providers apart. And 23 ranked it right in the middle. When we asked the ones that said buyers did a great job, providers did a great job of differentiating, what they told us was the number one factor was service and support. Again, great from a solution provider audience. If you talk about how you help customers achieve value and help them along the way, that's really important to them. Others said product features and price. It's interesting, way down at 5 overall, but actually number 3 in terms of what was ranked first were providers that did a clear job of communicating the business outcomes that they enabled. Pretty important. Conversely, the ones that said you don't do a good job told us that they felt the messages sound the same. Features and functions all look the same. It's really hard to gauge when we're buying product or service quality. And so they were struggling. So we got one side that says product features set you apart, but more people say we can't tell the difference between product features. And the interesting thing is we asked them, how good a job did they feel like their providers and their partners did during the sales process? Did the experience during the sales process give you a good feeling for what it was going to be like afterwards? Did you communicate the value of the service and support? And the general scores were well below average. Felt like there was too much focus on product features and functions. And we'll see that. Buyers told us that providers don't do a good job of communicating the business value. They spend way too much time on features. And they also said, we want to hear more and more customer stories. So what buyers are clearly saying is they want to hear about customer success, they want to hear about outcomes that support their business, and they want to hear about how you're going to help them do that from a service, implementation, and support perspective. Anybody remember the band Squeeze? Yeah, so one of my favorite bands from the 80s. After they basically got and broken up, they actually released the greatest hits album, and it was called Spot the Difference. The real motivation behind this album was a licensing issue because they had lost all the license to their old songs. So they created an album and they made minor tweaks to a number of the songs on the album, not all of them. Might have been a chord change, might have been a minor lyric change, may have changed the chorus slightly. And they created a little bit of game of you having to spot the difference. I'm a big music fan, but it was next to impossible for me to spot the difference. But I think enough people bought that album they did make some money on it. That's a little bit of what we're doing to buyers. We're asking them to find minute differences because we're not sharing the information they want and they're looking for. Now this is a mess. You'll have to look at it online. But the interesting thing, what we asked people is specifically, he said, it was related to that idea. We were trying to understand why buyers were telling us that they were willing to talk with providers. And it seems that they're very, very conflicted. We have some that say, because we asked, who would you give over contact details? And one of them said, if I look at the 100 plus marketing emails and 15 plus cold calls I get a day, I think they got my information. Another said that, we're gun shy because we've had a lot of people overpromise and under-deliver. But at the same time, we really want a strategic provider that understands our business and can help us be successful. And so they're nervous, but they want to have that time. There's another one that says, depending on how well I know them, I may withhold information and try and delay contact because I'm concerned about being oversold. And then finally, one of the last ones says is, I expect to be able to find on my own enough information to make an assessment that the provider has a solution that can help my business. If they do that, I'll contact them. If they don't, if the materials don't do that, I'm not comfortable engaging. Interesting problem. So now we know that we're in a situation where we have buyers that are changing. They have lots of different information, but they often find that the information you provide them doesn't help them understand you or understand the value that it provides to your business. It's causing them to be confused and conflicted. So what are things we can do about it? We want to talk about some paths to improvement. First thing you can do is what we call a messaging test, and it's a competitor SWOT test. Pretty easy thing to do. Take a look at messages that you have in your sales presentations, in your websites, in your collateral, and assess whether or not those messages are focused on differentiating, if that's what you think they're for. Obviously, some are just to provide details. Those aren't intended to be differentiators. Take those messages and replace your name or your product name with that of one of your competitors. If you read the message and the customer would still believe it and find it that valuable, that message isn't differentiated. Chalk it up to an area that you need to work on and start doing some improvement. Pretty easy testing. Once you've done that, what we always advise customers before they start working on improving their stories or creating better messages is to take a step back and make sure that they as an organization understand their position. And by positioning, I don't mean a tagline, I don't mean one statement. It's actually almost a strategic statement for your business. So who is your target customer? And then what is the need or opportunity that you're trying to address for them? Could it be that you want to help them capture the opportunity in mobile commerce by providing a more secure infrastructure? That's what they need to do. That could be a need. What do they want? This is a framework that actually was put forth years ago by Jeffrey Moore Crossing the Chasm. The and one is something we've added to it, and that's because of the importance of customer experience. Emotions play a big role in B2B buying. And if I look at what people want, they want it to be easier. They want to be positioned as heroes. They want to be seen as leaders of their industry. Understanding those wants can influence the stories you tell and the way you communicate and interact with the buyers. Then the product name of the product category. Compelling reason to buy. That typically is going to link back to the need. Why do you address that need so well that they should spend money on it? Primary competitive alternative. Primary competitive alternative may be a specific competition, may be another company, but it also may be the old way of doing business. So you look across that target market, and at the highest level of positioning, what you're really looking to do is say, what is the primary way, most common way, those target customers try and solve that problem today? That's your primary competitive alternative. As you get deeper in the buying cycle and you convince them to move forward, you're going to deal with lots of other competition. But the first thing you got to do is convince them to think about moving differently. And then once you identify that competitive alternative, then you want to identify how you're different to them. It's an exercise I do with lots and lots of companies every week, and it's the first step toward improving their stories. So that differentiation is a really important element of this to help customers understand. And so, how do we differentiate? Well, one option when all the products are the same is we can look at experience. You can look at your sales approach, your route to market. You can look at your approach you take to implementation and service. Remember again what I said about customers thinking service and support were really important. If you communicate with them and share with them details of what the experience is going to be like to work with you, what the first 30, 60, 90 days of an engagement are going to look like in detail, how you work with them, how you help them be successful, that can set you apart. It could also be the overall customer experience. And that flows into things like simple contracts, making ordering easy, making configuration easy. And you can also use guarantees. Now it's interesting, I have a lot of people come forth with guarantees, and when I ask them, okay, what happens if you don't need it? And some of them look at me blankly. Well, we always do. So then it's not a guarantee. Guarantee is a consequence. If we don't do this, this happens. But we're guaranteeing that it won't. Right? And that's the nature of the guarantee. So if you're going to do a guarantee, make it a guarantee. Second thing to look at is that as you think about the approach you're going to take to stand out, and this also relates to position against competition, it's important to understand where the market is. How many of you are familiar with Gartner Magic Quadrants? Quite a few. What about hype cycles? Not as many of you on the hype cycle. Hype cycles talk about innovative technologies. There's a third really important, what Gartner calls branded research, called market clocks. How many of you are familiar with market clocks? From a provider perspective, market clocks may be your most important piece of research in terms of market planning. What market clocks do is they look at technology across its entire life cycle, from the early stages of the market starting, all the way through to when you get to the mode where it's diminishing and you're replacing it with new technologies. We break it into 4 quadrants. The first quadrant is the advantage, from 12 to 3 o'clock. When it's in the advantage stage, it's early technology. People are buying it to get ahead. And so as you think about your positioning and differentiation, you really want to compare it to the status quo, to the old way of doing business. As you move into from 3 to 6, it's really the period of choice. There tends to be a lot of different options out there. So that's when customers need to understand the outcomes that the other customers have achieved. They want to hear the stories and they want to hear about the service, because the features aren't going to be as much of a difference. From 6 to 9, everything looks the same almost. It's moving towards almost a commoditization level. And that's where issues around experience and availability and simplicity are going to become very important. And then as the technology moves from 9 to 12, it's in what we call the replacement period. And actually that's a signal to you that you need to start finding alternatives for your customers. And it's a great way to help them move forward and get on the next curve. If you don't have alternatives for them and you're in that replacement stage, then you really want to talk to them about how you can minimize their cost of ownership and continue to extract value from that solution. But understanding that is really important and really helpful. The third thing, and this one is probably one of my most important ones, is we really got to become better at becoming great storytellers. And we want those stories to be authentic. Buyers don't care about feature lists, they've told us that. Long list of features don't help people remember anything. There's actually studies that show the human brain, if you see a list of 3 things, of things, the most things you can remember, do things at one time is 3. Some really good brains can remember 4, exceptional can remember 5. So when buyers see lists of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things, one of 2 things happen. They either forget everything. They remember just the first or second item on the list. Or they just remember that the list exists and maybe later they'll go back and find it. But stories engage. And we actually endorse a standard storytelling format that customers have told us and shown us works. The format is this: you open strong, you lead with an outcome. And the more you can quantify that, the better. Again, there's the issue of trust, that customers want to understand value. And while you're doing that, you want to provide context, how you deliver the outcome. Then you switch and that's almost foreshadowing for the story. You describe the current state, the situation without you, and the issues and challenges associated with that you've seen other organizations have. Very importantly, as you close out that situation set, you want to talk about the impact that that's having on their business. Because they may sit there and nod their head with you, but they got a lot of other things on their mind, and they not be making the leap that says that this is happening, it's costing our business millions of dollars, or it's costing us opportunities. And then once you've done that, you can then transition them to how you're going to take them to a better world with the resolution. And you close the resolution section by reiterating the outcomes that you opened with. Let me give you a quick example of this in a related industry. What if I walked into your store and said, we have the best search engine for e-commerce sites. We combine looking at clickstream with analyzing previous customer purchases with virtual analytics and sentiment analysis. Don't you want it? Tell you how this company actually told their story and what happened. They went in and said, we can help you drive a 10% increase in the number of people who visit your commerce site who actually buy through a better search engine technology. They told her that way, the customer was like, oh, tell me more. So what we've done is we looked at what was happening in search, and most sites use traditional search engines that aren't optimized and don't really understand the behavior of customers and just present results based on PageRank or other algorithms. As a result, the average e-commerce site sees a significant drift off of people who visit their site who were thinking of buying, who can't find what they're looking for. And as a result, they leave without purchase. What we've done is we've combined not just the search, but we look at the sentiment analysis associated with the search. We go back in and go deeper, and we look at your transaction logs of what they've purchased before. We look at the click stream of other things that we've looked at. And all of those factors go in for us to present the things that they're most likely to buy. When we look at what's happened with other customers that have taken this approach, they've seen on average a minimum of a 10% increase in the number of people who visit their site that actually buy. A little bit different story, a little bit more interesting. That story, they're now the search engine behind Walmart.com. We can do that in other areas. Don't walk in and say we have the best mobile security, supports this standard and this standard and this standard and this standard. Start by saying we can help you enable a new mobile channel that your customers can trust through a better security technology. And then you can tell the rest of the story. The other thing is, remember back where we talked about these buying teams are changed. It's a mix of business and IT, and it flows and shifts throughout. Be very aware as you're building the stories who you're selling to. If you're talking to IT, they're going to care about things like network uptime, understanding the infrastructure, risk, virtualization. But on the business side, they're going to care about opportunities. How can I have more availability for retail point of sale? How can I drive an increase in shoppers? How can I drive business growth? Be prepared to understand who you're talking to. And you're going to need stories for both. The other thing is that you're going to need to have different stories for different stages of the buying process. When it's early on and buyers are exploring, they're not ready to hear all the details of your product or all the details of how you support. They're trying to understand is there a better way to solve this problem than we're solving today? Does it make sense for us to invest in a particular area? And if you can get them to say yes to that, then you guide them to stories about what are the different options I have for solving this? What are the choices? And which providers are most likely to provide a solution? You help them that, if you make it, then you want stories for them to engage. That's where they're really trying to evaluate, can they work with you? It's where they want to understand, what is it going to be like if we choose this software? How are we going to get value? How can we minimize our risk in this solution environment? And then experience, they're looking at everything. Can I test it before I buy? Can we see what the users are going to react and other factors? Think about stories for each of these streams. Make one of those streams the focus of every story. You may have elements of the others, but don't try and do everything at once. The old days, we used to see white papers that talked about the new business solution area and then a detailed overview of why the technology was greater than a case study all in one place. Today, that's too overwhelming for buyers. They're distracted, they don't have the time. Break those into pieces. Guide them to each piece to try and guide them through their buying process. Once you get to the point where they'll talk to you, really important, we ask them when you have interactions with buyers, and again, they'll do it early in the cycle, what are you looking for? And this is again an indication of trust. They're looking for things that are about them. They don't think you can fake it with technical demonstrations, so technical demonstrations help them build trust. They want to have discovery sessions. They want sales presentations tailored to their company, not sales presentations tailored to nobody. And they want to have project discussions about that. Interestingly, the bottom ones, the ones that they value the least, or if you just call them in response to them signing up for stuff on the website, or signing up for a webinar, the fact that they attend a webinar. Switch it to something about them. General sales presentations. And this is interesting, and we need to research it more, but actually the bottom on the list, I found this really fascinating, and I need to explore more, is that they value sales arranged reference calls or visits to Lowe's. And that's been a staple for us in high-tech sales, is setting them up to talk to one of our customers. But I think what they're saying to us with this is that they can do that on their own now. And they have some skepticism if you set up the call that it's going to be scripted and you're going to have told them, I want you to talk about this and not talk about this if you can avoid it in others. Whereas if they're in control of it, they have that ability. So if you do set up reference calls, recognize that they are looking at it with a bit of skepticism. And that's a key thing to remember in all your interactions. You've got to break through that skepticism gap to the point where they trust you. And if you have that trusted relationship with them already, leverage it and build on it by helping them do more, helping them wade through this information for us. Now, how we do it tactically, I think is really about getting focused on their buying process. One of the things we think is really important, and this is not an easy thing to do, but explore and get focused on your customer's buying approach. Best way to do that right now is ask them. What are the steps you have to take in order to make a purchase decision in this area? And if they ask you why do you want to know, your answer is, I don't want to waste your time doing a bunch of things that we think are important that you don't. We surveyed a bunch of customers about that, and 75% of them said they were willing to share some level of detail. About 15% would go even as far as who owned the decision at various points in the process. But ask them the question, but make it about them. I want to do this so I don't waste your time. As you understand that process and as you look at the commonalities across them, then start to review the materials and the steps you've defined in your sales process. And see how they map to that buying process, as well as to the idea of the activity streams around explore, evaluate, engage, and experience. Look and see if you have holes and gaps. Maybe you don't have anything where people can truly engage and understand the support processes. Maybe you don't provide a way for them to experience, and there may be a way for you to do that easily. Once you have that and you've addressed those gaps, then one of the things you can do to help your customers is to define recommended paths through the buying cycle. Remember, they're in control, so they may not follow. But if you set them up with some information that's all about why they should do something, you should then advise them how to find information on how to evaluate. And if they move forward with that, great, you can continue to move them. If you offer them that and they don't bite on that, then you haven't really convinced them that they have to work in this area. So look for other assets and information that's going to help them convince that idea in the experience phase. And remember, you may need to reinforce that later, because as other people get involved in the process, you may have to reintroduce some of those ideas and remind them why they're doing this in the first place. As part of this is you may want to rethink your sales process and your sales stages. You see a lot of providers that define where things are in their funnel based on have I done specific sales steps. Then they attach percentages. The sales steps you perform are somewhat or largely irrelevant. It's whether the buyer has moved forward in their process. So a happy medium, you may want to keep the sales stages in your systems, but take your percentages and associate them entirely with where the buyer is. Nice way to start to bridge the gap. And recognize that percentages may fluctuate up and down as buyers move back and forth in their process. The other thing that happens is if you have formal separation, you have a marketing department and a sales department, you're going to have to blur those lines, because buyers may engage with you and your sales organization very early. And you may discover that they're not really ready to buy yet. They still need some to be information. You want to pass them the marketing to nurture. And then they'll flow back and forth. Or they may get very deep and then they'll find out about a webinar. They'll sign up for a webinar and it's a different idea. You got to blur the lines, because if the buyer's in control, it's not about your organization. Marketing doesn't just hand off leads and you resolve them. Blur the lines. So a few next steps, suggestions. Revisit your messaging. Take a look. Do the test, the competitor SWOT test. If you or everyone in your company doesn't understand your core positioning, Go back and do that and clarify. It's a great asset to share across the company and understand what you're all about. And then start to develop stories for the different buying team members and the activity streams. Turn your information into stories, and remember that part about connecting them with the past. That connecting them with the current situation, one of the things you're doing when you do it that way is you're giving them the opportunity to nod their head and agree with you. We've experienced that, we're dealing with that. Before you try and take them to a new place where they're uncertain about it. It's one of the reasons for the storytelling. Second thing is look at, do you have to adjust some of your sales processes? Do I need to look at this change in the way buyers are behaving, and do I need to look at factors of bimodal IT? As you look at the solution mix that you're offering to customers, ask yourself, is this about renovating the core, or is this about helping people innovate quickly? And you may want to help the buyers understand that they may need to buy it differently, because if they take a traditional buying approach, it's going to be too late and too slow. Adapt your pipeline approach. And then these types of changes take time, so pilot and test them. Pick a particular area and look at the total solution offer of what you're offering, the different products and services, and pilot it with a specific set of customers that have the specific needs that you're addressing. Then design the marketing and sales activities entirely from the buyer perspective. What's going to make it easier for them to buy? And then since it's a test, ask the people that are engaging with customers every day to let you know what's happening. Give them some freedom to adapt in the execution. So with that, let's go back to our story. When we left, we had the wizard really frustrated. Everyone had a headache. They were mad at each other. And so the wizard goes back into his room. And he goes and he mixes potions, and he's sort of in a frenzy, and he starts mixing more and more, and he has pots and pots everywhere in the room, and all of a sudden they start overflowing. And as he sees them overflowing, he starts to see a mix of colors, not just one. And colors blended and creating more, and he said, I finally have the solution. And so he went out to the people and gave them all the different colors. Not just red and yellow and blue, but purple, green, brown, others. And he invited them to a multicolor world. And that's where the story ends, with the world finally in a better place with multiple colors. You have the opportunity to be the wizard that makes your customer's world a better place to buy and get value from technology. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vice President AT